weeks after weeks, and the girl never returned to the floor. We've seen her turn up the ratings in golf. We've seen her turn up the ratings in basketball and the NFL, and all of these things transcend the sport like we have never, ever seen before.
The entire women's basketball ecosystem is collapsing right now, and the numbers don't lie. We're not talking about some gradual decline here. This is a complete freefall happening across every single level of the sport, and it's all because one player isn't on the court. Caitlin Clark's absence has exposed something absolutely brutal about women's basketball that nobody wants to admit out loud. Without her actively playing, arenas are empty, media coverage has vanished, and even brand new leagues with massive financial backing are struggling to get anyone to care. The proof is everywhere, and it's getting worse by the day. College basketball coaches are publicly calling out the media for completely ignoring their games. Professional leagues that were supposed to revolutionize the sport are seeing their engagement numbers crater. And now there's a real possibility that the WNBA's entire 2026 season could get canceled. This isn't just about one superstar being injured. This is about what happens when an entire sport becomes dangerously dependent on a single draw, and then that draw disappears.
From a head coach, and this shows you that people aren't really interested anymore. UCLA women's basketball coach. Now, UCLA is one of the best teams in the country, a potential national championship winner. UCLA women's basketball coach Corey Close said that I, from Los Angeles, not in Columbus, was the only media member to talk with her after UCLA's win in Ohio State. Close said she didn't mind if I printed her response, so here it is in full. The coach said, "Honestly, if I'm being really blunt with you, the energy in the building was great, but having no media here at all for either team, or either no AP, no nothing, says a lot."
Here's how bad things have gotten in college basketball, and this is going to shock you. UCLA versus Ohio State happened last week. Both teams ranked in the top 25. This was literally the only matchup between two ranked women's teams in the entire country that day. You'd think that would guarantee some media attention, right? Wrong. Not a single reporter showed up. Not one beat writer, not one local journalist, not one media member bothered to cover this game. Zero. The UCLA head coach, Corey Close, was so frustrated that she called this out publicly and specifically said she didn't care if it got printed because people need to understand how dire this situation has become. Think about what this means. 1 year ago, when Caitlin Clark was still playing at Iowa, a ranked matchup like this would have had reporters fighting for credentials. Press rows would have been packed. National outlets would have been sending their top writers. Now, complete silence. And this isn't some small conference game nobody cares about. This is Pac-12 versus Big Ten action between legitimate national championship contenders, and the media treated it like it didn't exist.
Creator perspective. When you put up unrivaled, ain't nobody watching. Nobody's checking for it. I'm telling you, I see it on all the content creators' side that people are not showing real interest in unrivaled. Now, maybe once the games start, some things will pick up, but people aren't showing an interest in watching unrivaled content. Unrivaled's promo, I don't know, they did way more promo last year. And it just doesn't seem like the actual interest from the people is there to watch this stuff.
But here's where it gets even more devastating. Remember Unrivaled, that 3-on-3 league that launched with massive fanfare and was supposed to change everything for women's basketball. Big names, serious financial backing, a revolutionary concept designed to keep WNBA stars engaged during the offseason while giving them actual equity in something they could own. Last year, you couldn't escape the promotional push if you were following women's basketball at all. Social media was flooded with content, highlight reels, behind-the-scenes footage, player interviews. This year, the promotional content has fallen off a cliff. Content creators who built their entire channels around women's basketball are reporting the same devastating reality. Nobody's clicking, nobody's engaging. The interest has completely evaporated. And here's the kicker that everyone knows but nobody wants to say out loud. Caitlin Clark isn't participating in Unrivaled, and that absence is absolutely killing them. What they desperately need right now is exactly what Clark brings to everything she touches. Eyeballs. Casual fans who will tune in specifically to watch her play. Without her, Unrivaled is struggling to generate any buzz whatsoever, despite having legitimate WNBA stars competing every single night.
Head coach saying that no media is showing up to cover the games anymore. Without Caitlin Clark, women's basketball is dying, bro. And if I see change, I will come out and say, hey, I was wrong. I'll say that. I don't have too much pride for that. But the way it's going now, nobody's interested. This here is on Awful Announcing. Caitlin Clark has the most to lose from a WNBA lockout. Here it says, will there be a WNBA season? While nothing is certain, fans and owners should be concerned.
Now let's talk about the WNBA itself, because this is where things get absolutely wild. The league is currently in the middle of collective bargaining agreement negotiations, and it's not going well. The players' union just authorized their executive committee to call for a strike if talks break down completely. You know what that means? There's a legitimate, very real possibility that the entire 2026 WNBA season gets canceled. Not postponed, not delayed, completely wiped out. And the timing of this potential disaster couldn't be worse for Caitlin Clark specifically. She already missed most of the 2025 season due to multiple injuries that kept her sidelined for months. If the 2026 season gets eliminated by a lockout, that's a year and a half without competitive basketball for the player who single-handedly brought mainstream attention to the sport. Think about what that means for momentum. All the casual fans she attracted, all the mainstream media coverage she generated, all the cultural relevance she brought to women's basketball, that doesn't just pause and wait for her return. It evaporates. Momentum in sports doesn't hibernate, it dies, and everyone loses in this scenario. Team owners lose game revenue at exactly the moment when ticket demand has never been higher thanks to Clark's impact. Players lose exposure when new sponsors are finally paying attention to the league. But Clark loses the most because her brand, her cultural relevance, her ability to transcend sports entirely. All of that requires her to be visible and playing the game that made her a phenomenon.
We have all these awesome players that we like. Olivia Miles at TCU, Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame, Tanaya Latson at South Carolina. UConn is back dominant. Ava Hayden and Chit Chat and Hannah Stokey at Iowa. None of these teams are moving the needle. When you create content about these things, people aren't that interested. I'm just keeping it real. Even from a fan perspective, it doesn't seem like people are that interested in these teams, in these players.
And get this, it's not like the talent disappeared from college basketball when Clark left. Hannah Hidalgo is at Notre Dame putting up absolutely incredible numbers that would have been headline news 2 years ago. Juju Watkins was dominating at USC before her injury, looking like the next generational talent. Olivia Miles is back at Notre Dame healthy and playing elite basketball. Paige Buchers is finally healthy again at UConn and showing why she was considered Clark's biggest rival. Kai Iriafen transferred to USC and is putting up monster stats. Anna Samaro is at LSU playing like a future WNBA star. These are legitimately elite players, future professional stars, the kind of talent that should be driving interest and viewership through the roof. But they're not, and the reason is uncomfortable but undeniable. A huge portion of the audience that showed up for Caitlin Clark wasn't actually there for women's basketball as a concept or a sport they wanted to follow long-term. They were there specifically for her. Some of that was her playing style, those deep threes from the logo, the court vision that made highlight reels, the competitive fire that showed up in every single game. Some of it was her personality and relatability, the way she carried herself, the way she responded to pressure. But whatever the exact combination of factors, it was specific to Clark as an individual player and cultural figure. When she graduated and moved to the WNBA, that audience didn't transfer their attention to the next generation of college stars. They just stopped watching entirely.
Playing a bunch of bums and cupcakes, and I love Malaysia Fuwiley. She ain't played against a legit player yet. They're not playing anybody. So maybe things for women's college basketball will pick up once conference play starts. The injury to Juju Watkins definitely did not help. But I also feel like a lot of people were clinging on to Juju Watkins. Why? Because they wanted to say and feel she's better than Caitlin Clark. It still was tied into Caitlin Clark. And now that that is removed, nobody...
You can see this reality playing out in real time if you know where to look. Content creators who built massive followings during Clark's college career are struggling now because videos about Hannah Hidalgo or Paige Buchers or any of these other legitimate stars get a fraction of the engagement that Clark content generated automatically. The algorithm doesn't lie about this stuff. View counts, click-through rates, watch time, subscriber growth, all of these metrics tell the same story. People aren't watching women's basketball content anymore unless it specifically involves Caitlin Clark, and she's not playing competitive basketball right now. LSU is ranked in the top 5 nationally and has Malaysia Fulwilly, who's an incredibly talented guard with legitimate professional potential, but they're mostly playing cupcake schedules full of blowouts against overmatched opponents. Even when they do play competitive games against quality opponents, the viewership numbers are nowhere close to what similar matchups generated during Clark's era. Same thing with UConn. They're back to their usual dominance, absolutely crushing everyone in their path and looking like the powerhouse program they've always been. But that dominance without a compelling rival, without someone like Clark pushing them and creating narrative tension, it's just not compelling television for casual fans who have unlimited entertainment options.
The fans need the fans. We need Caitlin Clark playing in games. We need competitive hoops. That's what we need right now. Here it says, all of them would lose something, but no one would lose as much as Caitlin Clark. I will admit that I do not understand what has made Clark the singular force muscling the WNBA into top culture discussions. How does anyone like shoot it from the logo? Basketball is boring. It has made every level of both men's and women's worse. Drive to the bucket, get put on your ass like an adult, or get off my TV screen. It says, what I think doesn't matter, though. I'm not a fan of Steph Curry either, but just like Curry, Caitlin Clark has become famous for being able to sink a shot from anywhere and parlay that fame into her own brand. Forget Curry. Nike clearly sees Jordan's potential in the CC brand. That was made clear by the Christmas Day ad, which featured a ton of star cameos and a pretty sick logo. Caitlin Clark is not the best player in the WNBA. I disagree. That's clearly Asia Wilson. I disagree. But Caitlin Clark is the biggest brand in basketball right now. The WNBA is full of stars, but her presence has pushed the league's growth into overdrive. What happens to that brand if she goes a year and a half without being on the court? Remember that Clark missed most of the 2025 season with multiple groin injuries. All right, so this is just laying out for you that, Caitlin Clark has more to lose than anybody from not playing in the 2026 season, and the game needs her. Man. So at the end of the day, it is me looking at the landscape and what's going on. I can clearly see that the game is dying out. The interest in it, in terms of people wanting to watch, media, the viewership on YouTube, all of that stuff is tanking in left field without Caitlin Clark. And that is just as real as it gets, man. Get down in the comments and let me know what you think. This Keep the Vision. Make sure you...
Here's what makes this situation even more revealing about audience behavior and what the sport is actually dealing with. The hardcore women's basketball community, the people who love the sport for its own sake and appreciate the fundamentals and team play and development of young talent, they're still watching religiously. They never left. They never will. But that audience was never big enough to sustain the kind of explosive growth the sport experienced during Clark's final college season. The massive ratings increases, the sold-out arenas in markets that had never cared about women's basketball, the mainstream media coverage that treated these games like major cultural events, that required something more than just good basketball. It required a transcendent star who could cross over into general sports culture. And right now, women's basketball doesn't have anyone actively playing who can fill that role. The media absence at that UCLA-Ohio State game isn't some isolated incident that happened because reporters were busy covering other stories. It's a symptom of a broader reality that should terrify everyone involved in women's basketball. Without Caitlin Clark in the mix, the sport has reverted to its pre-Clark media footprint, which is to say almost nothing. Regional coverage at best, national outlets have moved on to other stories. Beat reporters aren't traveling to games anymore, and the infrastructure that briefly existed to cover these teams comprehensively has largely evaporated. And that's absolutely brutal for players like Hannah Hidalgo and Kai Iriafen, and all these other elite talents who are doing everything right, playing at the highest level, putting up incredible statistics, and still can't generate even a fraction of the attention that Clark received almost automatically just by showing up. The unrivaled situation is particularly telling because it reveals something uncomfortable about how audience behavior actually works in sports entertainment. Unrivaled has legitimate star power. We're not talking about unknown players here. Breena Stewart and Nafisa Collier founded the league. These are established WNBA superstars. Angel Reese is playing and brings her own following from her rivalry with Clark. Eric Ogunboyle is there, along with other household names within the WNBA community. But here's the key phrase: household names within the WNBA community is a much smaller circle than household names in American sports culture generally. Caitlin Clark crossed over into that second category in a way that almost no women's basketball player ever has. She was getting mentioned on NFL broadcasts during primetime games. She was showing up at PGA Tour events and actually moving the needle for golf ratings when cameras caught her in the crowd. She became a cultural figure who transcended basketball entirely, and Unrivaled desperately needed someone with that level of crossover appeal to attract casual viewers and break through the noise of everything else competing for attention. Now let's talk about the CBA negotiations and potential lockout, because this is where things get genuinely terrifying for the league's long-term future. The WNBA just completed its best season ever in terms of attendance, viewership, merchandise sales, and mainstream cultural attention. Television ratings were up dramatically across the board. Arenas that had been half-empty for years were suddenly selling out. Major brands were fighting to get involved with sponsorship deals. A huge part of that success was directly tied to Caitlin Clark's rookie season, even though she only played 13 games before injuries ended her year early. The buzz around her, the debates about her impact, the controversies, the record-breaking performances, all of it drove unprecedented interest in the league from people who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives. Casual fans who couldn't name 3 women's basketball players suddenly knew the Indiana Fever's schedule and were buying tickets months in advance. If the 2026 season gets canceled due to a lockout, that momentum doesn't just slow down or pause temporarily. It dies completely. Casual sports fans have incredibly short attention spans and unlimited entertainment options competing for their time. They're not going to wait around for a year and a half for Caitlin Clark to return to competitive basketball. They'll move on to the next trending thing, whether that's a different sport, a different entertainment option, or just forgetting about women's basketball entirely. And here's the most uncomfortable truth that nobody in the WNBA wants to acknowledge publicly. Caitlin Clark is not the best player in the league, not even close. A'ja Wilson is the best player, and it's not particularly debatable. Wilson won MVP, Wilson led her team to a championship. Wilson is the most dominant force in the league on both ends of the court. She's beloved within the basketball community and respected universally by players, coaches, and analysts who understand the game at the highest level. But dominance and cultural relevance are completely different things, and this is where the sport finds itself in an impossible situation. Wilson is incredible at basketball, but doesn't move the needle for casual fans the way Clark does, and that's not a criticism of Wilson or her game. It's just reality of how star power works in sports entertainment. Sometimes the most talented player isn't the biggest draw. Sometimes the player who brings the most attention isn't the one putting up the best statistics. Right now, the WNBA's biggest cultural draw, their biggest needle mover, their gateway to mainstream relevance, is sitting out recovering from injuries while the league contemplates a work stoppage that could eliminate an entire season. Nike clearly understands exactly what Clark represents for their business and the sport generally. That Christmas Day commercial featuring her signature logo and multiple celebrity cameos wasn't subtle marketing. Nike is betting massive money that Clark's brand can reach Jordan-level cultural penetration. Obviously not in terms of basketball accomplishments or career success, but in terms of becoming a symbol that transcends sports entirely and becomes part of general pop culture. But that only works if she's visible, if she's playing, if she's doing the things that made her special and culturally relevant in the first place. The comparison to Steph Curry that gets thrown around is actually pretty accurate in one specific way. Curry fundamentally changed how basketball is played by making the deep three-pointer not just acceptable, but central to modern offensive strategy. Clark is doing something similar for women's basketball by making the sport appointment television for people who previously ignored it completely. But Curry's impact required sustained excellence over many seasons. It required him to be on the court night after night, proving that his style of play could win championships and change the game permanently. Clark hasn't had that opportunity yet because one abbreviated rookie season isn't enough to cement that kind of lasting legacy. So here's where we are right now, and the picture is absolutely devastating for everyone involved. Women's basketball is dying without Caitlin Clark actively playing the sport. Not literally dying, obviously the sport will continue to exist in some form. College teams will keep playing their games. The WNBA will eventually figure out its CBA situation one way or another. Unrivaled will probably survive in some capacity. But the growth, the momentum, the mainstream cultural relevance that the sport briefly achieved and tasted for the first time, that's evaporating in real time, and everyone can see it happening. You can see it in the empty press rows at ranked college matchups that would have been major stories 2 years ago. You can see it in the declining engagement with unrivaled content despite having legitimate star power. You can see it in the nervousness around a potential WNBA lockout happening at literally the worst possible moment when the league finally had mainstream attention. The sport desperately needs Caitlin Clark playing competitive basketball at the highest level, not doing commercials, not making appearances at other sporting events, not playing celebrity golf tournaments, actually playing the game that made her must-watch television in the first place. Because right now, without her on the court doing what she does best, the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. The casual audience has checked out completely. The media has moved on to other stories. The window of opportunity to build on last year's incredible momentum is closing fast, and if it shuts completely, it might not open again for years or decades. So here's the question that should terrify everyone who cares about the future of women's basketball. If the WNBA loses the 2026 season to a lockout and Caitlin Clark goes a year and a half without competitive basketball, can the sport recover that momentum when she eventually returns? Or will that casual audience have moved on permanently, leaving women's basketball right back where it was before Clark arrived and changed everything? Based on what we're seeing right now across every level of the sport, from college to professional to new ventures, the answer should scare the hell out of everyone involved. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I want to know if you think the sport survives this, or if we're watching the end of women's basketball's mainstream moment. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because this story is far from over, and things are about to get even more intense.